Chapter 5 Brute the Brewer. Engeldorf never showed up that night, but he arrived with his men the very next morning, making sure to collect double the pay, even though he had missed out on the triple. He was a real greasy fellow. It wasn't just one wagon that showed up, but 3 wagons full of stuff, extra stuff, things Brute didn't really need, but let's start at the top. As far as brewing gear was concerned, the first wagon was filled with top-of-the-line equipment, from sterilized and metal-dipped barrels to racks and racks of bottles, along with a bag of caps and the wrench press to seal them onto the glass. There were 2 items that stood out as strange to Brute. Thatcher was there to explain it to him, with about 10 of Engeldorf's men unloading gear around the barn, mostly barrels and bottle racks. It was hard to keep track of what was going on. These are airlocks, the old farmer explained. They go on the barrel to release the gas without letting air in. And what about that? Brute asked, pointing. That is a scientific tool. A hydrometer, I believe. What the hell is a hydrometer? It measures gravity, said Nori. What the fuck is gravity? Asked Brute. Nori rolled her eyes. Look, Thatcher said, trying to keep the conversation moving. It doesn't matter. The point of this device is to measure the beer before and after we use the airlock to determine its alcohol content. The Arcane developed a formula for it. It's all very specific physics and math that goes over my head. The Arcane studied beer? Brute asked. Where do you think your friend got the idea from? Said Nori. Beer is basically fermented tea. And what do you think half their elixir started with? Tea. The Arcanist studied everything in search of more magic. That explains a lot, actually, Brute said, rubbing his arm. How long do we have to wait for the airlock to do its thing? Nori asked. 5 days to a week, said Thatcher. How much longer do we have with the barley? It's malt now. I had no choice. It's been germinated and crushed, and I'm in the process of drying it out as much as possible to buy us more time. How much time do we have? Asked Brute. I'd say we've got enough for 2 test brew batches. 3 would be pushing it. That doesn't leave much room for error, said Nori. No, it doesn't, agreed Brute. So we better get to... Thatcher stopped mid-word when he saw the guys from the second wagon carrying in dinner tables. Brute, you should... Thatcher trailed off as Brute turned immediately and started approaching Engeldorf between the second and third wagon. The guy Engeldorf had been talking to walked away toward the third wagon. Engeldorf braced himself for Brute's rage. What the hell kind of shit are you trying to pull, Engeldorf? Brute said, getting right in the townie's face. You need every single thing in these wagons, big guy. We're not gonna be a restaurant, just a brewery. No, you got it all wrong, Boulder. You don't want the customer to just come in and buy beer. Why not? You want them to come in, have a seat, take a load off, take in the atmosphere, order a beer, relax, have fun, order another, try some of the food, turn it into a night, Engeldorf grinned, and then they buy the beer to go home. Brute grunted. I see I've gotten your attention, oh stoic one. You task me. I bring nothing but good tidings, Engeldorf clapped. Engeldorf clapped his hands, and the guy at the third wagon dropped the ramp down. More men started carrying a giant oven into the barn. That's enough, Brute said. It didn't stop Engeldorf. They brought out an enchanted icebox and a giant sink. We don't have enough water out here, the man from the third wagon Engeldorf had been talking to before walked over to a patch of dirt in the grass beside the barn. He drew a circle in the dirt with strange symbols reminiscent of the glyph circle Azalea had drawn. He clapped his hands together and slid them sideways, mumbling something until his eyes started glowing with the same pale light as the incantation for the Idrisop. He was an arcanist. He thrust his hands down. The ground shook, and then everything within the circle he drew sank so fast it was impossible to see how deep it went. It was impossibly dark down there. Then he swirled his hands around in a fluid motion in harmony with nature. He raised his hands and water emerged from the darkness. It looked pretty clean, even for a birth breach. "The well is formed," the man said. "Just build over it." "Kuzan," one of the other movers called out. "Stop showing off." He ran off to go help his friend. Were they all Arcanists? Brute thought. That would be impossible. Only about 1% of the Arcanists survived the war. If they all worked for this bozo, then Brute was the king of the world. "So," said Engeldorf, the bozo, "are you ready to discuss price?" "I'm curious," said Nori, who was always right next to Brute. "Do you take this long because you wanted all of this to cash in on the triple pay, or did you drum up all this extra equipment to make up for losing out on the triple pay?" "Wow," gasped Engeldorf. "That is an amazing question. Never heard anything quite like it. It's crazy insightful. I feel icky. Like you've been watching me." "Don't flatter yourself, Pill," spat Nori. "I have much better things to do with my time." "Whatever you say, honey. Here's the bill." All of a sudden, he was handing Brute a thin piece of paper. Where did it even come from? He wasn't holding it 2 seconds ago. This guy really was something else. Everything down to the last stool and napkin was accounted for. This was going to put a big chunk into his sack of coin, but nothing like buying the farm. And just like the farm, this all had the potential to pay him back handsomely. It was worth the investment. Now they needed a cook, a bartender, and a waitress. He made the mistake of voicing that idea out loud, and Engeldorf jumped in. "I can get you one of each, my friend, for an appropriate finder's fee." "You are full of schemes, Engeldorf," said Thatcher. Even he was wary of Engeldorf's persistence in involving himself. Was he going to ask to be a partner soon? They had to get him out of here. Brute didn't allow himself to get mad. Engeldorf's arguments were pretty convincing in themselves. They could make good use of all this, but Brute and the Hargroves would find their own help. It was time to pay the guy and get him out of here so they could start brewing. Brute made sure to tip the workers on the way out, especially Kuzan. You never know when a good impression might come in handy. Plus, if any of them got wise and put the glowing hop on the table together with Soul Ripper on the wall, that might spell trouble. So he thought it best to grease some palms. Make sure these guys would want to come back here for another job. If this was a final goodbye, they would no doubt return anonymously to rob the place. That's what Brute thought about Engeldorf and his little enterprise, daylight criminals. They spent most of that afternoon putting the equipment together. It was easy getting the kitchen and dining room set up, but the brewing equipment was a puzzle without a clear path in mind. What perplexed them the most were the 4 giant tanks they had constructed. They barely fit in the room, let alone flush against the wall. They needed to open up the back wall and put an additional wall to separate the kitchen and brewery from the dining area, with a bar coming straight from the brewing area to serve the customers. That would mean some renovations. Not the hardest job. Brute already knew Thatcher and Nori were good at carpentry and general housework, based on all the times they had repaired the damage he had done around the house, especially on the stairs. Demolition was more his specialty. Brute, Nori, and Thatcher talked about it. They needed at least 2 weeks to brew the first batch of beer. They could get the renovations done during that time. They needed more time. There would be one more round of experimental brew, which would give them a 2-week cushion. This essentially had 1 month to renovate. They essentially had 1 month to renovate. Figure out the brewing equipment and plan the kitchen menu, all while perfecting their beer brewing. This could be done, Brute thought to himself. Well, the exact words in his head were, "We can do this." What a sweet guy. Even at a month, that would still be cutting it close. The worst part was they needed to perfect the beer in just 2 brewing sessions, when there were so many variables to consider. They couldn't prepare for everything that might go wrong. They just had to take a chance and ride out the whole endeavor, for better or for worse. The timing for the beer is the easy part, Thatcher explained. There are some tricks, like cooling the boil quick, that I was worried about. But now with the enchanted icebox here, we really are prepared. Next you're going to tell me Enkledorf only means us good. Oh no, that guy is a total snake, said Thatcher. Brute grumbled. Or was it a chuckle? Sometimes it was really hard to tell. Guys, Nori said. She had trailed off to the brewing equipment. I think I found my favorite barrel. She was standing over one that was completely encased in stainless steel. Look, she pointed to the bottom. It's even got a little spout. How cute. Thatcher finished tying a rope to a bucket to use on the new well. Brute, lower this down and try to get it from the dead center. We need clean water. Got it, he said, and went about his task with calculated precision. When he returned with enough buckets that passed Thatcher's inspection, Nori's barrel was 2/3 filled with clean water. Thatcher measured out the malted barley and poured it into the giant tea bag with a drawstring up top. Right now, the drawstring was loose. The bag was huge. The string draped the net all along the outside of the barrel. They let the malt soak in the water for an hour. Do you think this will fit on that stove? Asked Brute. That's why I picked it, answered Nori. I hope it fits. After the hour was up, they pulled the drawstring tight and lifted the malt out of the water. Except it wasn't water anymore. The malted grain had done what it was supposed to and filled the water with natural sugars. The process had begun. Brute carried the barrel over to the wood-burning oven and gently placed it on the stove. They got a fire going in the oven, and soon enough it was time to add the hops. First they added the bitter hops, then waited until about halfway through the hour to add the Idris hop. At the end, they added the zesty hops for a more aromatic profile. It was time for the rapid cooling. Thatcher made a big deal about letting the barrel on the stove drip out of the spout down into a barrel that was already room temperature. There was also a benefit to getting in some bonus air at this point in the process. Brute rushed the barrel, now filled to the icebox. It took almost another hour for it to really cool off, through and through. Nori was taking care of the Idris hop. It was wet, but still glistened, like it wanted to shine, but was living in the shadow. Thatcher approached with the hydrometer. He took measurements of the beer that made Brute think the farmer was an imposter. He then wrote it down on a piece of paper and began a formula. It wasn't time to finish it just yet. Nori brought out the yeast she'd been messing with since the day they first crossed paths. I made a few tweaks after trying different beers from the bars and saloons around town. How would you know just by tasting the beer? Asked Thatcher. I talked to most of the brewers after, or their excuses for brewers. Most of the time it was just the cook or the owner. We don't exactly live in Tinfillion City. Of course you did. You're Nori, Thatcher said, smiling. Nori continued. I feel like this mix of yeast lends itself better to a bitter flavor profile than what I was using for the bread. But it's still essentially the same base. Good enough for me, said Brute. Thatch, this is it. This will activate the entire process. Nori added the yeast into the barrel and sealed it with a lid that had a slot for the airlock. They watched as Brute took one of the airlocks and inserted it into the lid, rotating it until it clicked in place. So that's it then? Brute asked. That's it for now, said Thatcher. Seemed pretty easy if you ask me, said Brute, all things considered. Well, explained Nori, if the beer is a hit, then we'll need to mass produce, which makes things more complicated. Wouldn't that be a wonderful problem to have? Thatcher said dreamily. Brute stared at the barrel. What's wrong? Asked Nori. His consternation didn't lift as he spoke. How do we know it's working? And as if answering Brute itself, the barrel began to bubble. Well, not the barrel exactly, but the airlock on the lid with the water in it. The yeast was eating the sugars in the beer and essentially making alcohol and gas. The gas was escaping through the water in the airlock. It was all very scientific, but Brute seemed to have a basic grasp of the process now. All that was left was waiting. 1 week of downtime, to be exact. Brute could fill it with the renovations, planting the next crop. Brute liked tilling the field. This time, they were planting 2 different grains. Thatcher picked up the seeds from Maringu in the west. It was a small town, but part of the Drift's great harvest belt. Maringu was essentially the farming holy land. Thatcher went there to get grain that could grow back in Cutler, but just wasn't available at their town shops. Cutler was barely a stop along the posting road. They preferred it like that, more or less. He managed to get about half the field seeded before the Hellhound of Huldoon showed up for their customary square-off. It's quite something watching a hellhound approach from the distance. This time, Brute was outside for the occasion. At some point, these altercations evolved into occasions. It starts with a smoke column that snakes through the sky. Small at first, at a distance, the column grows as it wavers, but it never goes out entirely. Next come the howls and growls. Before the flames and after the smoke, the hound can be heard hooting and hollering, begging the question, what possesses the beast to take up this plight? Brute had so many questions as the hound ran across the landscape toward him. Where did it come from? Did it roam? Surely it did not make the trip to Huldoon every time. That would cover a distance of over 1,000 miles one way. The dog was fast and seemed to have an infinite supply of endurance, but that kind of trip every couple of days would be ludicrous. Then again, maybe that's why the hound didn't show up every day. There was enough time for Brute's mind to wander and go back to the house for the oboe before the hellhound arrived. Brute sat on the grassy hill waiting for it. Today he decided to talk to it. "Hello, hellhound." "Ow! Ow! Ow!" The hellhound howled back as it jumped back and forth, left to right. "Ow!" "Settle down now," Brute said, before putting the oboe's reed in his mouth. He started playing Finnegan's Harmony, another nursery song used to teach instruments to pupils. The hound's flames began to slow as it stopped jumping. Then its hind legs plopped down, followed by the rest of it. The flames emitting from the hellhound's head and back were now still, simmering down. The music had an obvious calming effect on the creature. You might say it was a spell, as old as Grishambark itself. After a while, the hellhound was well soothed, so much so it was practically sleeping. It made a nice little bed for itself of scorched earth and grass turned to ash. It all but closed its eyes. Its coat of fire did most of the slumbering as it lay there, limb over limb, staring at Brute. "Okay now," Brute said to it as he attempted to walk away. "I have to go." The hound watched him walk away and never got up, its flame still low. When its fire was that dim, you could get a glimpse of the dark flesh underneath, so black it was like staring into the void. Brute kept turning back on his way to the house. When he saw Nori standing in the kitchen window, he stepped inside and asked her, "Is it still just sitting there?" "Yeah," she said. "What did you do to it?" "Nothing. Usually it leaves by now." "Maybe you're making a new friend," said Nori. "Impossible," Brute dismissed. "Hellhounds claim dominion at the top of the food chain. The only thing that can rival them is themselves." "Well, you seem to be holding your own against it. It might recognize you as an equal," countered Nori. "I am no equal in its eyes, more like an entertainer." "Did you do anything differently today?" she asked. "I added a new song." "I heard. Finnegan's Harmony. Like we practiced." "I think it went pretty well." "Me too, Brute. My mother would be proud of both of us. I miss her." "I wish I could have met her." Me too, Nori said with a somber smile. Wait a second. What? Asked Nori. Oh hell, that can't be it. What? I talked to it, said Brute. That might have done something. You seem to know a lot more about these things than I do. You live on the Rift and don't know about underrealm monsters? Brute asked skeptically. We're not a big town, so we don't breed many warriors. What's that got to do with it? Asked Brute. Well, without warriors or armies, we don't really pose a threat. Brute got silent. It was a knowing silence. In it, Nori felt so small, as if her tiny little perspective didn't matter at all. He looked at her with pure horror in his eyes. In the reflections, she saw innocent towns just like Cutler burned to ash for no other reason than being in the way. Without a single word uttered, Nori knew she was wrong. I guess Cutler is a young town still, she conceded. The Rift itself is a modern concept. What was once a unified kingdom under Coldheart is now divided up by two people, two ruling entities. We know our king is a just king, but do we know anything about what rules the Rift? Pondered Brute. What does Azalea say about it? Asked Nori. Well, she talks about the Covendantium like it's law, but I'm not sure if that's for the entirety of Underrealm. Interesting. There's so much we don't know. Both sides are entrenched and committed to war. That's part of why I left. I see. They both stared out the window of the kitchen toward the hill in the backyard. The hellhound was now up and walking around, contently sniffing the grass that burned underneath it. Nori looked at Brute, and Brute reflected the same confounded look. They both laughed at each other. I must admit, Brute, you make life a whole lot more interesting. Brute grunted, and for the briefest of moments, Nori thought she saw a smile escape the corner of his mouth. Nori made Brute lunch after that. The hellhound went away eventually. There was always the worry of it doing some real serious damage in the fields, especially now that the next batch was being planted. Brute seeded the rest of the fields that afternoon and worked up a real sweat doing it. He kept looking back at the tree line for the column of smoke. Something made Brute feel like the hellhound hadn't left, like it was still out there watching him. After Brute finished farming for the day, and before he hit his outside shower, he decided to stop at the barn and check on the barrel holding their first batch of beer. And that was pretty much the routine for the first couple of days that week. Brute spent the day either farming or renovating the barn. The hellhound hadn't returned in that time, and every night, after all the work was done, and right before dinner or a shower, he stopped to check on the barrel of first brew. Brute sat there on a reinforced bench, listened to it bubble, and smiled. The more it bubbled, the more alcohol it made. What the hell, Brute? Asked a voice behind him. If Brute still got scared, he probably would have jumped. Imagine that. A man the size of a hut jumping in fright. Preposterous. Instead, he turned around. Azalea? Yeah, Azalea, she said mockingly. Here I am. What are you doing here? He asked. She rubbed the bridge of her nose with thumb and finger. Ignoring his question, she asked, Didn't you forget something? Brute's brow furrowed at her. Well, it increased in furrowness, to be precise. The minutes ticked by as his eyes flickered with review of recent events. He was searching, looking for the answer to her question. Poor, simple fool. How could she be mad at this? She had never given him a specific day or time. Perhaps she was just as much to blame. And then it clicked for him. I'm so sorry, Azalea. I never took you out to dinner. He didn't make any excuses, but he did explain. It's the beer. It takes so long to ferment. I guess I got carried away with busy work and forgot about life. That's okay, you big lug. Brute got up and looked at the barrel like it was a curse. He rubbed his hairy chin. She looked at him and the barrel. All of a sudden, it felt like she wasn't in the room anymore. What the hell? That was the final straw for her. She walked up to the barrel she was looking at. Is this the thing that's distracting you? She asked. Well, I wouldn't say it's distracting, but it is on my mind constantly. Azalea's eyelids flattened horizontally across her eyes, nonplussed. This was just a perfect concoction of why she didn't get tangled up with men. Different flavors of stupidity, varying in potency, of course. But Brute was harmless. She knew of his capabilities going into it. Now was not the time to fault him for it. Embrace or abandon. She walked over to the fireplace with Soul Ripper on the mantle and dipped her fingertips in the same ash she used for the Idris Hop incantation. This one was quicker. She spread the ash across all 10 of her fingertips and spun a circle of it in the air, igniting the charcoal gray into a glowing, clean white light. Azalea spun the light particles around in her hands and then threw them at the barrel full of beer. It looked like she was casting a fishing net on the barrel. As soon as the light hit the barrel, it was absorbed and disappeared. Azalea exhaled and closed her eyes. Then she stood up straight and pressed her hands together flat with her fingers sticking up. Her body was perfectly symmetrical. Her fingertips were still faintly glowing with that pure white light. On Azalea's chest, a yellow flame of light burst forth. It blazed and turned her fingertips from the clean white to a fiery yellow. Then she zapped the barrel with yellow lightning. After the light show ended, she explained, "What you didn't see was me installing a time bubble inside that barrel. For every hour that goes by in real time, a day will pass inside that barrel. That means this batch will be ready tonight instead of a couple more days." "That's incredible. Could you do the same thing for those tanks?" Brute asked, pointing to the big tons. Azalea nodded. It didn't seem like a big deal to her. "I need to go tell Thatch and Nori. We were right about to sit down for dinner." "Don't you have to shower first?" asked Azalea. What? You just... I'd love to stay for dinner. Nori is an amazing cook. Shall we?" Azalea laughed awkwardly and followed Brute through the barn toward the house. "Looks like you guys are doing a lot of work to this place." "Yes, we are putting in a wall and a bar for a dining area. It looks busy right now, but the finished product is going to make it all make sense." "A bar and table service? Wow, you've really leveled up your little enterprise here. Did you get permits from the town to sell food and liquor on the premises?" "What?" Brute said, dumbfounded. "Oh boy," Azalea giggled. "Let's go talk to Nori, my dear. Don't you worry." They got to the house, and Brute immediately asked the Hargroves about permits. Nori took Azalea, joining them for dinner in stride. Luckily, tonight wasn't an individual plated meal, but a robust salad so full of vegetables and meat it looked more like a stew. Inside the salad, the regular Delberg greens seemed to get lost. Outside of the salad, she used Conisco husks, buttery leaves with a refreshing crunch, and the integrity to hold scoops of the salad. It was delicious. Brute's favorite part was the Hagabora glute steaks, cured, then cubed, and pan-fried before being tossed into the mix. Nori explained to Brute over dinner that as soon as Engeldorf showed up with the kitchen equipment, she went into the town office and filed for the correct permits. The only thing they needed to worry about was passing the inspection before they could open. "Well," Brute said, "we can worry about that after we have good-tasting beer." "Would anyone like to join me after dinner to taste test the first batch?" "It's too early for that, Brute." "Not anymore, thanks to Azalea. Tell him." "I put a time bubble in the test barrel." "You what?" asked Thatcher in shock. "You can do that?" asked Nori. "We can do a lot with magic you surface barbarians can't," she said, then laughed along with Nori. "Carm would have a thing or two to say about that," said Brute. "I'm sure he would. I would have loved a chance to duel with him. For now, we'll all just have to settle for me substituting for him." That made Brute a little sad. He didn't want a witch for an arcanist. He wanted a woman to love and his best friend. But that wasn't this kind of life. It was never going to be. Brute's life was doomed from the start. He had spent all his time and effort in the fight to forget that. Now he was in Cutler, surrounded by people he genuinely cared about. Azalea thinks she can do it on the tons, too, said Brute. What's the time dilation ratio? Asked Nori. 1 day in the bubble equals 1 hour in real time. Thatcher and Nori's eyes practically bulged out of their heads. Their minds ran through the implications almost immediately. This is tremendous news, said Thatcher. He had more excitement in his voice than Brute had ever heard before. All of a sudden, their plates were clear. Well, how much time do we have left? They asked Brute. Brute laughed and finished his meal, taking his time to allow Azalea to enjoy hers. All in good time, my friends. If I did the math right, then we should open the barrel at the top of the hour. Thatcher and Nori scurried off to take care of some end-of-day chores. By the time Azalea and Brute had filled up on the delicious meal, cleaned up after themselves, and walked out to the barn, the Hargroves were already waiting for them in the yard. The four of them were practically skipping to the barn. Azalea had never seen humans so excited. She reveled in it. When they got inside, Brute pulled the first brew barrel out and placed it on the wooden stand, which held the barrel horizontally for serving. Thatcher turned the lid of the barrel so the airlock was no longer at the bottom. Turning that portion of the lid upward inactivated it so they could switch out the insert. They removed the airlock and replaced it with a standard spout. Then they rotated the lid back so the spout was now at the bottom. Nori held the pitcher up to the spout and twisted it until the golden pale liquid spilled out. The pitcher quickly filled, a solid head forming on top of the beer. Thatcher went to get his tools while Brute and Nori both leaned in to take a sip directly from the pitcher. They both flinched. What? Azalea asked. It smells off, Brute said. Like sulfur, said Nori. Well, that's not good, said Azalea. It's a common side effect, explained Thatcher, the voice of reason. It doesn't spoil the batch. Take a sip and you'll see. Brute held the pitcher out toward Nori. She put her hands up to block it. By all means. Brute brought the pitcher right up to his mouth without inhaling and took a big gulp. He felt the foam of the head slide through his mouth and down his throat, pushed along by the beer. The flavor was delicious, but there was something noticeably off about it. He couldn't quite put his finger on it because it certainly wasn't the taste. How could something be so sporadic? The smell was putrid, but the flavor was a flowery mix of bitter and fruity. The bouquet aroma danced in his mouth. It was delicious, but far from perfect. Well, they asked him. Something is missing. Of course it is, said Nori. We still have to carbonate it. Carbonate it? Brute asked. The bubbles. That's what makes it sudsy. Oh yeah, Brute said. How did we do that? We add sugar, Thatcher answered for Nori as he got the hydrometer ready. Once again, he measured the liquid and wrote the numbers into his formula. Nori wandered over to look at her father's work. She had always admired his ingenuity out in the fields. Watching him get to use instruments they had only read about put a spark in his eye she hadn't seen since her mother died. It's a lot more effective if we bottle the beer, but we can also add proportional amounts of sugar to the barrels and tons we use to serve in-house, said Thatcher. I could probably help with that too, Azalea added. Thatcher smiled as if he had been hoping she would say that. How so? Nori asked. Well, if I'm following all this correctly, you add the sugar to feed the yeast, but this time you don't use the air thingy to release the gas. So it gets stuck in the beer, right? That's exactly right. You're going to want it cold too, right? Asked Azalea. What are you up to? Brute asked her. Well, if we can do this right, I can charm the tubes that take the beer out of the tons or barrels and have them gas and cool the beer so it's ready to pour right at the bar. It's carbonate, corrected Nori. You can carbonate and cool the beer in the tubes. That's phenomenal. Can you do anything about the sulfur smell? Asked Thatcher. Unfortunately, no, but I can ask my sisters if there's any smell spells. I'm not familiar with any, to be honest with you. We'll have to include something in the next batch to counteract the sulfuric smell. Perhaps more of the citrus hops would help cut through it. When the Hargroves got going, it was like they were the only ones in the room sometimes. Brute didn't mind. He saw them as one giant brain, and right now that brain was firing back and forth with ideas. We have enough grain to try several combinations of hops. If that's not the issue, I could try building a new yeast. Time was our only true restraint. The malt and the hops will keep now, thanks to Azalea. Oh, it was nothing, but do me a favor. What can we do for you, dear? Asked Thatcher graciously. Keep an eye on this one tomorrow, she gestured towards Brute. He has to take me out to dinner at Obelisk. Warm cheeks. Brute came the closest he ever felt to blushing. It felt funny getting teased in a loving way. For him, it practically made him tear up. Her cute little jab was the total opposite of anything found on the battlefield, where every gesture was one of deep intent and violence. Oh, we'll make sure he picks you up before sundown and wears a clean shirt. Thank you, Nori. I knew I could count on you. Okay, guys, Brute said, trying not to let them rally against him any further. Azalea laughed as she made her way to the door of the barn. Brute looked twice at her. You're leaving? Yeah, I've been here since... I have to get back to the shop before it gets too late. What about the charms you were talking about? Asked Brute. Well, first I need to know where everything is going to go, so let me know when you're done with the renovations and know where everything is going and what's going on in the tanks and barrels. In the meantime, I'll study up on my incantations. Who knows, maybe I'll find something for smells. Hold on, Nori said, following her out. I have something for you to take home. Nori ran ahead, and Azalea waited to say goodbye to the boys. Brute walked her out. I'll see you tomorrow for our date. That's what I like to hear, big guy. She slapped his triceps with the back of her fingers. He grabbed her hand on the swing back from the slap and pulled her in for a hug. It wasn't an excuse to sneak in a kiss or cop a feel like other guys might have tried. It was a genuine hug. Good night, Azalea. Good night, Brute. As the witch walked across the front yard, Nori ran out of the front door of the house with a white box in her hands. She caught up to Azalea and handed the box to her. What's this? Azalea asked. Well, you left before dessert, so I packed 3. Azalea opened the box excitedly to find 3 creme-filled Nolica pastries. They were the perfect mix of moist and cakey on the inside, yet flaky and crusty on the outside. A truly decadent dessert. There was powdered pink sugar sprinkled over the top. Nori truly was an artist in the kitchen. Azalea walked away from the Hargrove farm back toward town, grateful she had decided to make the trip today to scold Brute for forgetting their date. Now the date was on, and she had delicious treats for her troubles to enjoy when she got home. Her sisters were lucky she didn't have Brute's appetite, and Azalea was pretty sure Nori had a crush on one of her sisters. The only problem was she genuinely had no idea which one.